So, where to begin? A lot of people will yawn and stare away when we talk about poetry. That's because they don't look into the poets who write the poetry that they're reading. So, how do you make the Joe Schmoes in the audience appreciate the wonderful commentary and inspiring works of the poets and their poetry? We can talk about something fun, like occultism! But we'll get to that later. Now that I have your attention, let's get into the actual poet that this video is about, William Butler Yeats. So let's first set the scene. The year is 1865. Wait. Let's start actually at 1169, because right now the English are invading Ireland. Their rule will last about almost 800 years, and we'll see a lot of oppression, death, and various cruelties to the Irish people. I mean, we all know about that potato famine. But at least once we understand that, we know that it's been that long since the Irish have had their own country, we can now move back to 1865 with the birth of William Butler Yeats. Yeats was raised by a Protestant family to a father who was a famous Irish painter, John Yeats, and a mysticism-loving mother, Susan Yeats. The family would raise their son in London until he was 15, where the family would then leave and return back to Ireland, specifically Dublin. There, Yeats would become influenced by both the Irish nationalism movement and the Celtic Irish tales. Here, Yeats would become deeply entrenched in the politics and effort for Irish independence, as if you know any amount of English or Irish history, this century, the 19th century, is filled with the Irish trying to break away from England. Yeats would write various poems on the subject and events that led up to the War for Independence, such as his poem Easter, 1960. Along with the Irish independence, Yeats was heavily influenced by major world events like World War, while also getting a taste for the occultism, most likely because his mother was also into the occult and mysticism. Now, to define the occult or what mysticism is, I suppose it is tough to do so, as the word is vague and broad. But for the sake of this video, one could argue that mysticism is different from religion, simply that it is wanting to commune with a god or higher power, rather than just simply following, believing, or worshipping that said god, or gods. Yeats once wrote in a letter, "If I had not made magic my constant study, I could not have written a word of my black book, nor could the countless Kathleen ever have come to exist. The mystical life is the center of all that I do, and all that I think, and all that I write." This mysticism would further influence Yeats into the love for Irish culture and independence, as he would later become a senator for Ireland in 1922. So, with all this history, what poem am I going to analyze here? With so many great poems on Irish culture, independence, and politics, which one is best to look at for this video? For the sake of showing Yeats' complexity as a fighter for Irish independence and duly a pacifist, the poem I chose to look at is The Second Coming, written in 1990, in response to the aftermath and the destruction of Europe after World War I. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming! Hardly are those words out, when a vast image out of spiritus mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with a lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it, real shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? So, the first thing we'll look at is the title. Of course, the second coming, we're thinking of like the second coming of Christ. That idea of the final judgment day. And then also with that, I also want to point out before we talk about anything else, a lot of the birds imageries. So different types of birds here. We have the falcon, so kind of that predatory hunter type, and then also the desert bird, so I'm thinking vultures, kind of the scavenger. With that we have waves and ocean type imagery with war and bloodshed. I think that's important considering the size and the scale of what Yeats is talking about, so World War One. And then probably my favorite line here is, "Best lack all conviction while the worst are full of passion and intensity." For me, this is kind of universal, and when we look at something that's usually any point in history, or even today when we have moments of despair or tough times, the worst of people, I should say, are the ones who are usually taking advantage of it or reveling in it, enjoying it, while the best of us are usually kind of sitting on the sidelines just watching in horror, kind of like the car crash. You can't look away, but you want to so bad and you can't. You have to look at it. It's something awful. And from all this, we get a revelation. So again, that second coming, more of that biblical and Christian kind of allusions here, or those images. Then we have an exclamation, so even further homing on that point of, how terrible something as war is, right? It's almost like disbelief or surprise. And then we also have more Latin, or just a example of Latin here. This translates roughly to worldly spirit, and so I think this is put here specifically because it's troubling his sight. There's the shape of a lion body and a head of a man, and a gaze pitiless as the sun. So for me, I'm thinking Yeats is kind of putting humankind, we have the head of the man, on the body of a lion, so that ferocity, while simultaneously being kind of the king of the savannah or the king of the jungle. Lions are vicious, we're known to rip up their whatever they're eating, their prey. Kind of comparing human beings to that, where we kind of have destroyed each other in such a violent manner. And then of course it's moving his slow thighs. And then we have a pun on reel, I believe. Not only is it reeling shadows, like reeling in shadows of these desert birds, but I'm thinking of the real type of shadows, right? If we're saying these are vultures are going to be scavengers. So I'm thinking in like wartime, right? We have kind of the real birds, kind of picking at, and unfortunately, as kind of gross as this image is, picking at the dead people, the people who have suffered and fought for this war, and they're reduced to just food for scavengers and birds. So something really impactful for troubling sight, and then also kind of back to that disbelief. Now, you're probably thinking, who cares? What does this 100-year-old poem have to do with me? Well, other than the obvious reference to modern wars going on right now, I think it's important to look at it as a critique to human response and responsibility after and during tragedy that they have caused. The line that the best lack conviction, that specific line, is so strong because the best implies that those who could have put an end to a war, or the World War, didn't. And this doesn't just apply to war. Even the conflicts within yourself, the age-old issue of man versus self, can be related to the lack of conviction to make a change. Within ourselves are little wars and conflicts that can happen from time to time, and even in our lowest points, it can seem like the vultures overhead are circling, awaiting the surrender of the body and or the mind. However, if we can recognize such destruction, we can get away from the evil of that passionate intensity, and maybe give ourselves not a second coming, but a second chance.